18F is an organization that is building the 21st century digital government. In order to build online government services that have the high quality of modern cloud applications, 18F built Cloud.gov, a platform as a service that can be used to stand up web applications for divisions of the U.S. government. Aidan Feldman helped build Cloud.gov, and on today's episode, he dissects its architecture. Cloud.gov is built on Cloud Foundry, which sits on top of a special version of Amazon Web Services, built specifically for the U.S. government. We also explore how application development works at 18F, and how 18F has built a culture that reflects an ideal mix of public service and fast-moving innovation. If you are interested in sponsoring Software Engineering Daily, or if you want to advertise on the show, please send me an email at softwareengineeringdaily@gmail.com. If you enjoy this episode, please share it on Facebook or Twitter. The show grows by word of mouth, so I really appreciate it when listeners tweet out or share it on Facebook. It really helps the show get more listenership. And if you have any questions about the show, or if you have criticism or feedback, you can always send me an email or tweet at me. And after a message from today's sponsor, we will get to this episode, Cloud.gov with Aidan Feldman. As an engineer, you want to minimize scalability issues. When there is high traffic to your application, you need your content delivered with 100% availability. CacheFly is the content delivery network with the fastest global throughput. Every application needs a CDN, whether you are in gaming or ad tech or social networking or e-commerce. If you're at scale, you need a CDN. Go to cachefly.com. That's CACHEFLY.com and use promo code SEDaily for a 14-day, 2 terabyte free trial. 65% of CacheFly customers use CacheFly for software distribution because CacheFly has the fastest throughput globally for large files. Try out CacheFly for free today. There's a 14-day free trial up to 2 terabytes of bandwidth. And if you use promo code SEDaily, you can help support Software Engineering Daily. If you want your app to be successful, you can't have delays and downtime. So check out CacheFly, CACHEFLY.com, and use promo code SEDaily for a discount. It would support the show. Now let's get on with the show. And thanks to CacheFly for being the newest sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Aidan Feldman is a developer with 18F, an organization that is building the 21st century digital government. Aidan, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Jeff, thanks for having me.
What is 18F?
So 18F is a digital development shop in the General Services Administration. So we're essentially doing development work, design work, consulting type engagements, and other kinds of things within the federal government for various agencies.
And we had a previous episode about 18F with Sarah Allen, where we briefly discussed the organization, but I do want to talk about it in some detail with you. How does the ethos and the internal atmosphere of 18F compare to that of like a startup or a big company?
Yeah, it's interesting. We operate a lot like a startup in the sense that we have a lot of freedom to kind of control our destiny in the sense of how we want to be structured, the kinds of projects we want to take on, et cetera. And really, we do operate like a business in the sense that we are cost recoverable. So we don't have a line item in the congressional budget. We do all of our work for pay from the agencies we work with, even though we are government agents, government employees ourselves. So yeah, and
sort
that
of
was
like an internal contractor model.
Exactly. But, there is, I think, a big difference in terms of, we're not only working for profit, or we're not, trying to maximize profit even. We're trying to be cost recoverable. That's the sort of like financial goal, but really we're there to, improve how government does IT.
Speaking of that, when 18F got started, what was the state of application development and software infrastructure in the federal government?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've ever used a government website, you can sort of imagine. But despite how large the United States government is, there's surprisingly few people with design or technology experience working in the government. So there are certain areas where that's not true. In intelligence, there are certainly a lot of very very smart technical folks, and then like certain little groups scattered across agencies, but there's not a lot of expertise in-house. And so it ends up being a lot of, people who are running various, programs through agencies, having to rely on vendors for expertise, which is great. Yeah.
It sounds like there was not a systematic way of architecting and creating and deploying software applications prior to around the time 18F got started.
Right. So there's nothing centralized. The U.S. government is very federated and very siloed, in that each agency kind of manages their own things. The General Services Administration, who we work for, they do things like rent all the federal buildings and deal with acquisition for which is buying things for all the different federal agencies. But there really wasn't much there in terms of kind of development help, for these agencies, and also, platforms and things for them to be able to ship better software.
Yeah, and speaking of the platforms, I do want to talk about Cloud.gov. Can you explain what Cloud.gov is, and we can get into a discussion of the technology stack that 18F has built?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cloud.gov is a hosting platform for and by the federal government. So it is running Cloud Foundry, which is open source platform as a service. And on top of that, we're able to, we're focusing on doing a lot of things around compliance. So making sure that it's easy for federal agencies to pay for and use it and be able to get through their compliance processes, quickly, and make sure that they can run software securely.
Right. So government agencies, for those who don't know, can be extremely risk averse, and operating within a government often involves compliance because you have to adhere to those risk aversion. I mean, that risk aversion is there for good reason, for legacy reason. How does that compliance affect the type of software you're building? How does it affect the speed at which 18F can operate?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I think there's a couple things that lead to having like such a compliance heavy environment. The risk aversion is one of them. If you're at a startup and you fail, you might be in the news, but like no one really cares, right? Unless you have like shareholders maybe. Within the federal government, if you screw something up, you make the front page of the Washington Post and get called in front of Congress, right? So it's very, very high stakes. And so, I see like compliance, which is all these, sort of rules that you have to go through to launch or operate software, is, sort of the best effort way to mitigate that. I think it can be better in a lot of ways, but that's where it sort of comes from. So trying to launch software in government, it's sort of gated before you sort of make it publicly available by a process called like authority to operate. And that's a lot of what we're trying to reduce the burden of getting through that kind of gate.
So the advantage of having your own cloud, if you're a company, is kind of, you can give more liberation to the software developers and the independent teams in your organization, because if they need to spin up some machines, they need to run some kind of experiment, they need to launch an application, they can just say, hey, we just allocate these machines as a service. So explain how that sense of liberation has affected software development in the federal government, or at least at the 18F level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's huge. Well, outside of 18F, at places that don't have access to, infrastructure directly and, maybe don't have the expertise, they have to get a contract to get a data center or, space in a data center. They have to contract to get developers to build the application. They have to get a contract to deploy that application and operate that application. And all of these, they may lump some of those together, but each of those is a, multi-month bidding process. And then you have to, compete those. And I think there are a lot of, kind of problems with that process where you're not able to necessarily award the contracts to the, people who are best suited to do the job. And so it's a very, very long process and very expensive process to kind of launch anything. And so being able to have kind of on-demand infrastructure hugely changes that, especially using something like a platform, because you can give a lot of that power to the developers. So you cut out a lot of that operating burden, because we're able to do that in a sort of central way.
What's the cloud service provider you're using underneath Cloud Foundry?
So we're running in AWS, and we're actually in the process. We're just finishing up moving into GovCloud, which is different than Cloud.gov.
Right. Is GovCloud the data center that Amazon built specifically for government applications?
Yeah, exactly. So it is AWS. It has most of the AWS services that you know of, like, EC2 and S3 and things like that. But they do a lot to kind of meet the compliance needs. So, I think it's maybe, I think like the servers are only accessible by, people with citizenship or visas or something like that. Basically, they put a lot of like protections in that are needed for like especially, sensitive data that government might have.
Okay, and so why did you use so you have these cloud servers running in Amazon's GovCloud data center? Why did you build an additional platform on top of that using Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever tried to set up a server from scratch, but it's kind of a pain. Even with virtualization, you're still given a Linux box, and you have to configure it. You have to install security patches. You have to make sure that only the right ports are accessible, etc. It's really a nuisance. And within 18F alone, we were finding that that's what we were doing when we first started, and it was a lot of overhead, and there was a lot of kind of dependence on our very small operations team to sort of provide that expertise just to get a new environment running for an application. With a platform as a service, the developer can just say like, push this app to a new environment, and it just kind of works. So it kind of democratizes that expertise in the sense that developers are able to kind of serve their own needs better.
Certainly. Of course, Amazon also has its own platform as a service products. Why did you choose to layer Cloud Foundry on top of the Amazon infrastructure instead of using Amazon's platform as a service products?
Yeah, so we did evaluate a lot of options at the time, both sort of commercial offerings and open source ones, and with a sort of all-in-one platform, you get vendor independence is one big thing. So with Cloud Foundry, they have different sort of adapters that the end user doesn't, for the most part, doesn't have to even be aware of what the underlying environment is. So, if you were running directly in Amazon, that's going to be a big change going from, using AMIs in one place to using, Azure, whatever their equivalent is of machine images. And so you build up a lot around, vendor dependence. And I think that's been a huge problem for government in the past. So being able to have that flexibility is huge. It also does things like allow us to offer, services that Amazon doesn't. So, for example, if we wanted to offer like a CouchDB service, let's just say, we could. Cloud Foundry allows you to create that sort of abstraction where you say, here's how to create a new CouchDB instance, and you can just sort of provide that as like they call it the marketplace, and you can create add-ons in that way that are custom. So we're able to do sort of interesting things there around offering custom things.
it sounds like the layer of Cloud Foundry gives you multi-cloud ability, and it also reduces the switching cost in case you wanted to change the core infrastructure over to Google or Amazon or DigitalOcean in the future.
Sure. Yeah. And, similarly, there's vendor independence for Cloud.gov itself. So, we can, for example, move from Amazon East, where we are now, to GovCloud, and the tenants, for the most part, they'll have to do some manual work, but they won't have to do much changing to the application. Also, using an open source platform, which is very popular, gives independence to those applications. So if an application can run in Cloud.gov, it can run with almost no extra effort in any of the commercial providers that run Cloud Foundry.
So one thing I'm curious about is if GovCloud, the Amazon data center offering for governments that serves these compliance things, so they can't have certain platform features because they would violate compliance. But couldn't you theoretically build any of those things on top of your Cloud Foundry, your Cloud.gov layer? Like, couldn't you potentially violate those compliance issues at the higher level?
So it's not so much that like certain technologies can't be used. It's a lot around like who can access the servers, how are deployments managed. A lot of it is around like data integrity and security. So because we're running Cloud Foundry in those, or we're moving to running Cloud Foundry sort of in those walls, we're able to add sort of any offerings that we want. And yes, of course, you could do this at the sort of infrastructure layer and kind of build your own abstractions there. But using a sort of unified platform provides a really nice, like, consistent experience for users.
Sure. Okay, so I'm kind of curious about the contractual bidding process, because Amazon obviously won this contract, or I'm not sure if you guys chose them or if you were evaluating Amazon and Google and Azure and you just decided on Amazon. Like, what was that process like? How did you come to the conclusion that Amazon was what you were going to be running on?
Yeah, so this happened before I got to 18F, so I can't speak too much to it. But for purchases like that, a lot of what the government has to do is, it's very hard for the government to pay sort of usage fees. So it works in this sort of interesting way where you go through a third party and you're essentially allocating a large amount of money to buy this software for a certain amount of time. So even though Amazon charges by usage, we basically have this large fund like that we awarded with this contract as a sort of like upper limit, right? So like we dedicated a certain amount of money. The government can't, there are laws against like committing the government to a sort of indefinite amount. And so it has to work in this, seemingly backwards way where, you set aside like a fixed amount of money to use a piece of software that's charged by usage. But as to why Amazon was chosen versus something else, I can't speak too much to that.
Okay, so do you have any idea like when the bidding process would reopen, or it's just not your wheelhouse?
I'm actually not sure about that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about 18F is that we have, not only developers and designers, we actually have a whole division dedicated to acquisition. So not only buying, software for ourselves, be it, infrastructure, be it, licenses for desktop software, that kind of thing. But, this is
that's known as procurement, right?
Right. So procurement or acquisition. Yeah. So, not only are we doing this sort of, buys for ourselves, we are doing a lot of work with outside agencies to do what are called like, ghost RFPs. So like ghost writing a request for proposal, basically, writing up their requirements so that they get better software and helping, kind of design better ways for other agencies to buy software. So we're kind of attacking the like government's, IT challenge from multiple angles, of trying to do better development, offering better platforms, but also, we aren't trying to cut out private industry by any means. And so we're also trying to make it easier to buy better software and better, hire better vendors.
Okay, so this vendor and cloud competition discussion is interesting, but we should talk some about like the actual usage. So let's say I'm a developer at 18F and I want to spin up a server. I've got an application I want to deploy. Maybe it's for the IRS. Maybe it's for the transportation department or something. So how do I spin up a server and deploy an application to Cloud.gov? How does it differ from how I might do that if I'm at a company that has its own cloud?
Yeah, so I mean, we're using essentially off-the-shelf Cloud Foundry. The customization is in sort of things built around it, but using Cloud.gov is just like using any other Cloud Foundry provider from the developer's perspective. So there's a command line tool, and that provides pretty much everything that the developer would need in terms of deployment. So you're able to basically push local files, and it uses something derived from like Heroku's build pack system, where you'll have a build pack for different frameworks and different languages, and they'll try and make a sort of best guess about what framework or language is being used, run the appropriate installation commands, things like that, install dependencies, and then start up the server. But really all the developer needs to do is say, CF push. And it's a really impressive system, and it's quite seamless. And you're able to do things like, configuration as code, in the sense that you can, specify, okay, I want 2 hosts running, and I want it at this domain, and I want these services connected, and I want these environment variables set, and things like that. And you can check all that into like YAML files in your repository. And so you're able to, get sort of reproducibility in that way.
Let's walk through an example of how an application got created in 18F, like just because I think listeners may not understand this process. They may not know, they may be confused. Like, describe the process of 18F interacting with some other government organization. The other government organization says, hey, we need X built. 18F starts designing it, starts speccing it out, starts working with software engineers and designers and project managers, and take me through that process from the beginning to end, from just a high level.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of the high level points. So we,
maybe there's an example of a specific application that you recently built.
Yeah, so I mean, agencies, as I mentioned, come to us for work. We can't force anyone to do anything really. So let's say the Federal Election Commission might approach us and say, we want, our website rebuilt, and we want, maybe they just say that. We have an intake process where we help them kind of better articulate what their needs actually are, and understand help them understand their budget and what sort of timeline that they might have, what sort of staff they might need to achieve that, if there are any special skills, et cetera. And so after that process, there's basically a contract signed. We call it an interagency agreement, that basically, dedicates money for this project from their budget. We then, staff up a project, and that'll often involve what we call like a discovery sprint to kick it off. And that will be, sort of driven by user experience folks, but have, the engineers and the product people and everything involved to, even better understand the problem. So, interviewing, either if it's replacing something existing, interviewing current users or current operators. If it's, doesn't exist yet, if it's a greenfield project, they'll talk to people who they think will be using the project and understand their needs. I think one example of this that's interesting, I read about this on the 18F blog, is this app recently 18F helped build that was like a college scorecard. This is a project that allows students and parents to make more informed choices about what college to go to. And this is a perfect example of an app that might easily get
biases baked into it or problems if it were developed by the private sector. So it's really like kind of the perfect example of an application that would make sense for the government to build. Explain how the development of the college scorecard app went, because I think that would help epitomize some of the processes that you're discussing.
Yeah, so I wasn't directly involved in that project, but for those who don't know, it's a website offered by the Department of Education to provide basically provide students and families with better data to make informed decisions about college. So it will do things like tell you, what is the average income for this degree or this major from this college, 5 years, 10 years out. What are the average, sort of student loan burden, or what's the sort of debt that people have coming out of this college. And so where, there are certainly a lot of private offerings in terms of, how to make decisions about college, the government has a sort of unique perspective and a unique opportunity to provide a lot of the data that the government collects. So it uses things like IRS data, it uses things like, the Department of Education data, of course, and then makes that all available. So there's a tool to not only browse the data, but you can also download the raw data sets and use the API. So I think a lot of those, even private offerings, can now be improved because they have better access to the underlying data, and so it's a sort of win-win for everyone, I think.
Right. Yeah. Totally. So what was the most recent project that you have worked on that you helped launch?
Yeah. So I've been on Cloud.gov for like 4-ish months. The project I worked on before that, for my first year at 18F, was called Communicart, or C2. And that was a project to help purchase workflows in government. So if you want to buy a stapler in government, you have to get like 2 to 6 signatures, which is, so, and this is for, what are called like small purchases. So under $3,500. So that process was all based in paper and, phone calls beforehand. And, the tricky thing is that for those kinds of purchases, you need to keep record of all of those, not only the transactions, but also the authorizations for 3 years past when the purchase is made. And so it was this really difficult bookkeeping problem, for individuals, for people who are doing maintenance on buildings or whatever. They don't want to have to worry about this stuff. And then it was also difficult for auditing because, the information was scattered and, the person might not work there anymore. And the person, may not remember, 3 years ago who they called.
Was this being done in spreadsheets and Oracle things before, or?
Not even. That's what I'm saying. It was people would, have to dig up old emails and, probably look at phone records and, write things down from memory. Yeah, it was that would have been a good start. So the idea was to basically have a central, system for doing these kind of purchase approval workflows and keep all the information in one place, so that not only is it more efficient for the people making the purchases and the people approving the purchases, that they can see, for example, what are all the outstanding purchases that are made, or even to answer basic questions like how much money is my department spending, this quarter, those kinds of things.
So this is what I love about 18F, because I think some of the maybe the I don't want to say disdain, but that's the only word that's coming to mind that, Silicon Valley people might have for government is they're oh, they don't have these processes in place. They don't have the right kinds of software that get things done. And 18F is solving that exact problem. It's greasing the wheels in these places where you can't even imagine that these types of, kind of slowdown would occur. But, this type of you have to do bookkeeping to acquire a stapler. This type of process the auditing process is in place for a reason. And it's just unfortunate that the way that things have developed, there's lots of manual processes, and that's the beauty of 18F is it is this kind of put grease in all these little gears that are the government bureaucratic machine, and over time you're going to get lots of speed up, especially because it sounds like, I mean, that type of application you're describing, it's obviously has some complexities, but it sounds like the type of thing that it's not like you're going to need like a continuous like monitoring and DevOps team assigned to it to handle the outages and keep 24-hour uptime and everything. It's just like this simple application that you write it once and it's kind of like solves this problem forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming into government, it was really surprising that the problems really aren't technical. Like even that app that I'm describing, which has some like business logic and sort of like different rules for how requests get routed and things like that. Like it's a Rails app. Like it's not like, we're not talking like a really complicated thing here. And most of the projects that we build are, we do a lot of static sites actually. So like the technology is not the challenge. And I think that was something that's really surprising to me and really surprising to a lot of people coming in, is that, it's really, how do you navigate the bureaucracy? How do you help people in government be comfortable with things like working in the open or using open source or, like having their data, made available, that kind of thing. So, even for developers, I think you have to have and also build a lot of, sort of empathy for the other people who are working in government who want to do good work, but yeah, as you were saying, are just kind of mired down in this, kind of layers and layers of regulations that make it really difficult to work efficiently and effectively.
And one of the things about technology that's interesting is like when you get certain behaviors baked into how you act, it's really hard to see another way. And so one example of this is like, I think about podcasts, for example. Like my workflow for downloading new podcasts, I listen to tons of podcasts, and the workflow is so weird because it's this weird legacy thing that's been around for like 10 or 12 years, but hasn't really advanced very much. And it's like you have to open this podcast player, you have to keep like, I don't know, tons of 20 gigabytes of podcasts on your phone, and it's like, does this really make a whole lot of sense? And the answer is probably no. But it's it's easy to not have that frame of reference because you've just been dealing with this infrastructure for so long. And I imagine that there are a lot of people in government who are just so used to it, they're kind of like maybe blind to these efficiencies that could be created, and then when 18F unlocks it, it's just you just get huge returns in productivity.
Yeah, I think that's that's an interesting advantage to having the sort of consulting model, right? Of we are coming in from the outside, not only people coming from outside of government to 18F, but also 18F not being stationed in any of the agencies that we're working with, right? And so we're coming in with sort of fresh perspective. At the same time, there's a lot of domain expertise and there's a lot to be learned from the people in those agencies who want to, work better. They just don't have the resources to do so. And so that sort of like marrying and us kind of being humble and like listening to what we can learn from them, I think results in much better products, and we're able to bring, the technology expertise and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a mix.
One thing you mentioned was like the static site. Like there's lots of people in the government, lots of organizations in the government that could just use a static site, a static website. And you built this, 18F helped build this platform called the Federalist Platform, which just helps people launch static websites. So could you talk a bit about this platform and explain why you built your own kind of, it sounds kind of like a just publishing tool. Why couldn't you just use WordPress?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a ton of government websites that use Drupal and WordPress are two very popular options, and those are definitely out there, and you can definitely do that. And actually, GSA, our agency offers a kind of like WordPress. It's not a one-click WordPress solution, but it's essentially that. Similar to the kinds of things you'd get with like GoDaddy or these commercial providers, but offered by the government. We saw an opportunity for making that even simpler, right? In that there's no database, there's no, running code. You're never going to have performance problems or things like that. And so we're able to offer, that hosting and that sort of build process for static sites, but also a, user-friendly editor that allows them to, just focus on editing content and not have to worry about, design or layout, that kind of thing.
Right. So WordPress is even heavier than what you need to deliver such, what these different organizations within the government actually need.
Yeah, I mean, I think WordPress is great in a lot of cases, but this is another option that requires even less like operational sort of focus than WordPress might.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of the operational side of things, you gave a talk at OSCON, and one of the things that you discussed was how difficult it is to find DevOps people who can work in government. Well, I mean, it's just this conflation of things that lead to it being hard to get DevOps people hired at 18F. Can you explain that process? Explain why. I mean, obviously, you have your own cloud, so DevOps is important. But explain why it's so hard to hire people. Why DevOps is so important for 18F.
Yeah. So really, the problems are not specific to DevOps, though. I think the demand for DevOps in the industry is high, so that we're competing with tech companies or other organizations, so that makes it equally hard as everyone else. But hiring in governments, especially for engineers, is difficult because we have a much longer kind of turnaround time for hiring than a private company would. So we are using a sort of specialist hiring authority that allows us to hire much quicker than a lot of other parts of government. With some trade-offs, so that we have a maximum term length of 2 years that's renewable to 4 years. But even that takes the average hiring, which is 9 to 12 months for the rest of government.
Software engineers are always looking to automate their work. Software automation lets us get more done with the same number of resources. Investment automation works the same way. Wealthfront is an automated investment service that relies solely on software to acquire and manage client accounts. Traditional investment services have many humans in the loop, advising clients and taking fees. The problem with these older advisory services is that the advice that these services are applying is often so systematic that a computer could give the same answer, or an even better answer. Wealthfront takes a new approach with software-driven automated investment that provides better returns through software engineering. Go to wealthfront.com/SE daily to get a special offer for our listeners. $15,000 managed for free when you open your account. Don't pay commissions and account fees. Maximize your gains with Wealthfront's set it and forget it investment automation. Check out wealthfront.com/SE daily. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and it would also introduce you to the world of automated investment, so you can see if you like it or not. Wealthfront.com/SE daily. Thanks to Wealthfront for sponsoring the show. You've been a loyal sponsor, and we really appreciate it. Now let's get on with the show. So tell me some about how the teams at 18F are structured. How does project management, project flow work? How does once an application is up, how does the maintenance go? Just kind of give me an idea for how teams work.
Sure. So 18F is structured as what we call chapters and what we call business units. So chapters are basically division by skill. So there's engineering, there's design, there's product, there's acquisition, and then there's change strategists. So essentially people who do digital strategy. On the business unit side, we have custom partner solutions, which are things that we are building custom for an agency and then handing off to them ideally. We have transformation, which again is that sort of strategy kind of work. We have products and platforms. We have acquisition on that side also. And then what we call learn, which is essentially like training resources. So 18F is sort of, matrixed in the sense that, within engineering, we have teams that are, supervisory. So, I meet with, the 5 or 6 engineers on my team, every 2 weeks or so and, do check-ins and see how things are going, but I'm not necessarily working with them every day. So people from engineering and people from design are, sort of grouped together on the different project teams. And, so a project team will last for 1 to 12 months, let's say, on a given project. And most people are just on one at a time. And so, so the sort of projects come in through those different business units and then are staffed from the different chapters.
Okay, that makes sense. And how much of 18F's software is open source?
I'd say 98%. We do have one big project that was that we brought in before we kind of formalized our open source policy that they've been trying to get open source basically since the beginning, but I've run into a lot of it's just hard to make it a priority, I guess. So that's something that's being pushed for. But really, almost everything we do is in the open. I barely ever do anything in private repositories.
So how did you overcome how does 18F overcome the kind of like notion that, if it's open source, maybe there's exposed security risks or something, like anybody in the open can see how these government tools are working and potentially have security breaches. Is that a complex discussion to have with people who may not be well versed in how open source works?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about. There really is a lot of like fear and uncertainty from.
It's like the same thing about the cloud. Like,
absolutely.
We're afraid to move into the cloud because it's security risks. When in actuality, it's kind of counterintuitive, but there are fewer security risks if you're in the cloud.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of it is hearing their concerns, not having a sort of knee-jerk reaction and kind of making the people you're working with feel ignored. Right. But I think we do, have good answers for, and I'm hoping we can, sort of write down good answers for a lot of these things. So, for example, like security of open source software, yes, you can see the vulnerabilities, but there are also a lot more people looking at it to find and fix security vulnerabilities, or, you have that possibility when the code is out in the open. And so we also have like some very good, some very good things that we can cite, to support this. For example, a memo from the Department of Defense in 2009, I believe, saying that, closed source is not inherently more secure, and that, security by obscurity is not a valid argument. And so we're able to cite things like that. And, when the DoD, the Department of Defense, says something around security, people tend to listen. And so, I think a lot of it is kind of building up, precedent and saying, here, look at all the places it's been used in government very effectively. And, here are agencies that are in support of it and whatever. And I think a lot of it, again, is just the fear of, kind of being a first mover and, not wanting to take on that risk. But if they see that other people have taken on this risk and, done fine, it's, that's often enough.
When you have this huge library of open source software that the government can use, it almost seems like, could other governments potentially just like fork 18F and like start, using it for their own internal processes? Because I imagine like every government needs an internal auditing process to track who bought a stapler.
Right. Yeah. The more we talk to other governments, the more we realize how not unique these problems are. So, yeah, we have, Cloud.gov, for example, the Digital Transformation Office in Australia is looking to do something very similar. And we sort of went point by point of like, okay, well, here's the special thing that we built for Cloud.gov because compliance. And they're like, oh yeah, we need that too. And then, okay, here's this other thing that we need for, security reasons. They're like, yeah, we need that too. And so it's really, there's a lot of opportunity there for reuse. And I think the better that we're able to, document things and automate things, and make them easy to stand up, the more reuse we're going to get, and the more able to, in the future, collaborate. And so there are a few good examples of 18F projects that other governments are using. One being an analytics sort of public-facing analytics dashboard. So the one we built is analytics.usa.gov, but
which is a pretty cool site, by the way. I urge listeners to check that out.
Yeah, but that's being used. That got sort of forked and stood up by the city of Philadelphia. I think like Anaheim, maybe Anchorage, like a bunch of cities. And I think Norway, forked the government in Norway forked one of our sites and stood it up. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity for reuse. And so I hope, as we're building projects going forward, we have that sort of reuse in mind and think about, how easy would this be to customize, and can we, break it out into, modules that would make it easy to reassemble and not, be very US government specific.
What is I'm very curious about your perspective on the ethos of people who join 18F, because these are like super experienced, super talented technologists that choose to go to government when they could go to work at anywhere in Silicon Valley. They could go to Uber, they could go to insert hot startup name here. What is driving the people who go to 18F to work at this place where you don't get, as far as I know, I don't think you get stock options. The salary may not be super competitive with like a Google or a Facebook. What is the ethos of the people that are joining 18F?
Yeah, I'm not holding out for the U.S. government IPO. It's interesting. There's, I think, a real unique offering of, startups. Obviously you can get amazing benefits, you can get great pay, you can get really flexible work. Working in the government, you get a sort of unique opportunity to have enormous impact for change, and at a place that desperately needs it. And so, because things are so, bad technology-wise in government, every little thing you do is like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this is so much better than what we had before. That's just a really rewarding thing. And I think we get...
So you're saying 18F is a bunch of mission-driven millennial types?
I didn't say the last part. So we actually have a huge range of people, and a large number of people at 18F have families. GSA, our parent agency, is actually very. So I didn't mean that as a
condemnatory statement, by the way. I meant that as very much like okay.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception of like we're all a bunch of like Silicon Valley, like 20-year-olds. Like that's not the case at all. I'm actually, on the younger side of 18F, and I'm late 20s.
Okay, so, millennials at heart. Sarah Allen, obviously not a millennial, but she very much had an ethos that I think I see reflected in some of the millennial types that I see these days, like where you work, what the mission of what you are doing, the higher level mission is very important. I think it has something to do with the fact that, we've gotten to the point where the best thing that a human can possibly buy is a smartphone, and that only costs $500 to $600. So beyond that, where is your money going to take you? So it becomes much more important about like, where are you going to work? What are those 8 to 10 hours of your day consisting of?
Yeah, and I think there's also a unique opportunity for 18F of, there are a lot of nonprofits, there are a lot of other governments that need, kind of technology and design expertise, but 18F has a sort of critical mass of people, started by a bunch of people that are super talented, and that just sort of brought in more people that wanted to work with that caliber of person. So we actually have a shockingly like talented team and sort of experienced team in that, I have people that I, manage technically that have run engineering teams before, right? And I don't know what I'm doing. So, it's like people are not there to, climb the ladder necessarily. They're not there to, take home a big paycheck, though I think our salaries are, for the most part competitive. It is people that want a supportive job, want a, opportunity to make a big difference, and are patient.
Well, and it's the unique situation of your downside risk is protected because it's not like a startup where you're potentially going to run out of money, but also you have, this is totally unique, totally untapped ground in terms of what kinds of engineering things you can do. It's totally new.
Yeah. So
how big can 18F get, or what is the larger picture? I don't remember exactly how 18F fits into the GSA and the technological revolution that's happening at the government, but how big can this movement within government get, or where is it going? Just the technologization of government.
Sure. So, 18F is at 185 people, and we are 2 years old. So we've been growing very, very fast. I think, we have plans to grow to something like 215. Long term, I don't think that we'll just continue growing indefinitely. I think there's a certain, over a certain size, we could risk becoming not as agile, that kind of thing. So what I'm optimistic for is that, with the U.S. Digital Service, which is our sort of sister team in the White House, that one of their big projects is standing up digital teams in agencies. So where we are, somewhat independent and, able to work with a lot of different agencies, on a sort of one-off basis, having teams that are actually, well versed and well aware of the problems specific to veterans, or the problems specific to education, or the problems specific to housing or whatever. Having technologists and designers in those agencies will allow them to have much better sort of long-term IT improvement. And, that we can continue to exist to offer things like the shared services, or offer, expertise in a specific area where they might not have it, or to do prototyping or what have you.
Is there a potential future where Cloud.gov could get opened up to public use? Like I'm a random developer in the United States. I'm like, I want to contribute to government and I want to deploy an application. Maybe I make it open source and then I deploy it on Cloud.gov servers. Is that a possibility?
Probably not. I mean, we definitely want contributors to our applications, and we're doing a lot of thinking about how to make things easier to contribute to and more reusable, so that we can have collaboration with outside entities. I don't think direct deployment to Cloud.gov is a possibility. There's restrictions around, that you have to be a government employee to, deploy directly to a .gov domain, for example. So we wouldn't want anyone to be able to do that. But I do hope that we're able to, provide better kind of facilities and mechanisms for people to contribute and to get outside involvement like that.
Would it make sense for the government, as the government builds up more technical inclination, would it make sense for the government to deploy its own email server? You've got Gmail, but it's the government. I can see that making sense. Or a government spam detection program. Are these, could you potentially see the government creating these things that have historically been done by the private sector?
In some areas, right? We're not trying to replace all of these private offerings. We didn't want to run our own data center. We want to use an off-the-shelf data center or virtualization kind of level. But we're able to offer things that are specific to government on top of that. So I think having that layer of abstraction where you can then use vendors from the outside underneath and have that sort of independence is really appealing. And so, GSA does actually offer things like, Google Apps for Government. I think they do the reselling, if I'm remembering correctly. But we use Google Apps, and we use a lot of commercial tools, and I don't think, and I don't necessarily want that to change. But having a broader array of offerings allows more flexibility for agencies, and so they're able to, if they have some sort of compliance need that they want to put on top of email, that if there were an email offering from GSA, that they could compare that against the sort of commercial providers, and just have better options. I think more options are always better for the consumer. The consumer in this case is government.
Sure. Okay. So as we're beginning to close off, I guess I want to ask one or two more things about technical stuff. So, you're running on Amazon, Cloud Foundry sitting on top. Do you guys use containers? Is there any container management system that you're using?
Yeah. So Cloud Foundry actually uses a container system that I think predates Docker, if I remember correctly, internally. But for better or worse, that's sort of the developer is not even aware of that. So when you deploy it, it's built into an image, and then that's what's run on the different sort of runners in Cloud Foundry. They did recently add Docker support, and that's something that we are looking to add this year. There's a lot of sort of compliance complexities there, in that with doing things at the sort of build pack level, in the sense where we're providing, the version of Ruby, and we're providing, OpenSSL and whatever, that if there's a security patch, we can deploy that sort of centrally, from the Cloud.gov side, and all apps benefit from that. When you have containers, you sort of lose some of that benefit, in that, I don't know what's running inside your container. And it's then sort of the developer's responsibility to do those upgrades. So there's some downsides there. It is something we want to support. We just have to figure out some things like that. So doing security scanning of containers is something we're going to be looking into, that kind of thing. But we are using Docker for development on a lot of projects. We're using it for services that are attached to Cloud.gov. We're using it heavily in Concourse, which is like the CI, the continuous integration system we use for Cloud.gov. That's all based around containers. So it is definitely being used around ATDEF.
So I guess just to close off, what is the future vision? What are the things that you're aligned around right now? What are you working on right now at 18F? You specifically.
Yeah, so Cloud.gov is my project, and so we are focusing on getting FedRAMP authorization. So this is more compliance fun, where FedRAMP is essentially a stamp that says this is cleared by this sort of like central authority as being a secure system, and that they checked all the boxes of doing things that they need to do to meet the government-wide security requirements, or at least the FedRAMP specified security requirements. And a lot of that is, moving to GovCloud is one of those things, being a sort of approved underlying system for that. I'm also doing a lot of work on tooling around like security and compliance. So, for example, when you're launching software in the government, you have to write up a lot of documentation saying like, here's architecture of the system, here's why, here's how we're taking care of user management, if that's applicable, here's how we're taking care of, network security, if that's applicable. But having things like Amazon and Cloud Foundry, and then the things we're building around Cloud Foundry takes care of a lot of those requirements. And so I'm working on a tool called Compliance Masonry that allows you to essentially do documentation like you would build software packages. So you're able to inherit from different underlying packages. So saying I'm using Rails, okay, that takes care of CSRF protection, and I'm using Amazon, so that takes care of making sure that you have a fire hydrant next to your server. that's like the kind of things that launching a static website you shouldn't have to worry about. But
that is an actual compliance issue.
That's literally one of the rules. But the developers shouldn't have to care about that. They should just have to know, okay, what are the specific requirements for my application, and what are the remaining rules that I have to take care of at my level, given I'm using all these components. And so
I got
building up
why do you need a
documentation
fire hydrant next to your server?
in case it catches on fire, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, data integrity is a very big thing in government. So, an entire data center burning down is not a great thing.
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's things like that. For better or worse, they're the requirements. And so, at the very least, we want to make it as easy as possible for systems to be built on top of it.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, Aidan, thanks for a super interesting conversation. I am a huge fan of 18F. I think you guys are doing awesome work. And I don't know, anytime you want to come back on the show, if you got an announcement or you want to discuss something, feel free to come back on. I'd love to have you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Aidan.